My name's Latreese Wright, and I'm a student athlete at South Arc, and I am here with another Ladies First Talk, and I have my special guest.
Should I introduce myself?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Kenny Hickman, the Chief of Police here in El Dorado.
Okay, and today we're just gonna get his point of view on things because it's from my understanding that you've never been talked to about any type of situation as far as police brutality. So, what is your view as the chief of police in El Dorado, Arkansas? What is your view about that? Because people definitely do have what do you call it, where they get to labeling, and it's okay, all police are this, or all black people are this, or all white people are this. So I definitely want you to explain to the people.
You know, I want to be very careful to how to answer the things and answer them thoughtfully. You touched on labeling. It's a real tendency for us to group so we can understand or we can control and all, and that's something we can't do. But we all are. We're all human, and with regard to brutality, I recently took a class on ethics, police ethics, and it was a rather lengthy online class. And after having done this for 27 years, I looked at it a little bit differently than what I saw in the class was the fact that they grouped brutality as a broader spectrum than what I would have considered. I would have considered it physical abuse and all, and basically what it would be any kind of abuse at all. So much of what I think comes out of police or athletics or a classroom setting has a lot to do with relationships. What we've tried to do, and some of the chiefs before me were doing a lot of it as well, is fostered a lot of the relationships within the department and get away from sometimes what you had, that cookie cutter approach of what a cop is supposed to be. I can remember when I started back in '88, there was a time when I was out in personal business and back. I know the math wouldn't work just right from '88. And I had that kind of an idea that a policeman is supposed to be like this. And then when I finally got into a realization that the best cops are the cops that are extensions of themselves, and they're the same kind of person, like talking to you now, or if I talk to you on a traffic stop, or I talk to you in the store, or at a social gathering or whatever. They're much better if they're just kind of an extension of themselves, so they don't have to. They're not playing so much a role. They're being who they are. So with regard to the brutality, a lot of it comes because of the labeling, because of the lack of interaction, there's a great many things in history that have happened to where if you devalue a certain human group or something like that, you can have problems. But going back to the relational thing, there are two overriding rules that I have at the police department, and it's not something that I learned all by myself, and it's not something exclusive to me, and I think it's something that we're buying into. And while I'm big on delegating on particulars, and the division heads run their divisions, very important to me for mutual respect, and that's the first one. And that means that as I talk to you respectfully. It doesn't matter if you're the newest rookie on the team or if you're the most tenured captain that we have. It's that I have a general respect for you as a human being. And to this date, thank the good Lord, I haven't yelled at anyone in my office, since I've been chief. I just don't think that's the way that you relate to people. But that begins to be passed on down. If you go into a store often where you see the staff is really friendly, real customer oriented and stuff, it's usually because they have a good relationship with their manager, and the manager models that. And what we try to do is to model that. And the idea is to take that mutual respect and to take it out onto a traffic stop or to an encounter when somebody's reporting something and they have a loss or they're under some kind of tension and all that. And do that just as much as you possibly can. The second firm rule that I have is to honor the badge. And what that means is that when you put the badge on, society basically invests the trust in you. And some of the incidents that you see that go viral and all that, it's when that trust has been violated. And what you have,
George Floyd situation.
yes, and what we have to do is understand that putting that badge on is a responsibility, not an entitlement. I don't get to make laws and rules when I'm out here on the street that don't fit within the confines of those law books. I have the authority that those law books say I have. Legislators have said that I have, and then when it says I don't have it, I don't have it. And I think that's very important, and you don't violate that trust that's been given you. So that's a goal. I think with any group of human beings, myself included, you're not always going to be perfect, but that's the goal, is to have that mutual respect, to honor the badge, to make sure we're within the framework of law and treat people like we'd like to be treated. There are a few things in that I just feel compelled to qualify. Sometimes things do get very rough, and they get that way very fast. And I have some very dedicated people that they deal with some very messy situations. So sometimes it's just, you can't avoid a messy situation, and I hate that, but that is the nature of our job. But I constantly remind myself, I've reminded myself over my career and try to pass that on, is we're not the provoker. We're not the one that provokes a problem. And sometimes we're called on and compelled to resolve one because there's a victim, there's someone that's been that's under a threat or under duress, and we have to step in, and sometimes that can be violent. But it is because of something that was dictated by an illegal and a dangerous activity, not because of any anger that might be elicited from us or something where we felt like we're entitled to some measure of payback. That's when you step across. That's when you violated, you know, the trust that the community gives you when you're under the badge. That's a long answer, and I probably went around.
It's okay. It's very well explained. I definitely feel like as people and as humans, we do tend to put labels on everything, and that's really has been part of the root of the problem. We go about thinking, oh, this group of people is this way, this group of, so we may come at them in a way that we thought they were, but they weren't that in the beginning. So it just creates a problem within itself. So I definitely, like, that was a very well explained answer, actually. And what do you feel the policemen should have done in that situation with George Floyd?
I think where they messed up, and it's always easy, I'll qualify it with simply this, but we do have a pretty good amount of information now. I'll qualify it simply with this, is I don't know everything that happened. But what I do know is that when someone is secured in handcuffs, his threat is very minimal. It doesn't mean it's totally gone, but it's minimal, very minimal. And when he is at that point talking about can't breathe and having labored breathing and all, they are by law, I know they are here, and I would assume they're bound to render aid. You have to render aid. We had a recent incident where, I won't go into the details, but the place or the individual, we had a person that basically, he became violent in a convenience store. And he was detained by an off-duty officer. There were no blows thrown. There was nothing like that, but they did have to push him over against the car to get him handcuffed. And sometime during that contact, he either passed out or he acted like he passed out. I think only God knows which. But as soon as he was handcuffed and he went limp, they had him and set him up physically, immediately called an ambulance, and they took him to the hospital and evaluated him. He was fine physically and everything. So you respond to those things. It's saying in most law, the way it's written is once somebody is secured, you immediately begin to render aid and summon assistance at that point. I don't think it's not optional. It's just something that you do, and that's where they the very beginning they messed up as he was complaining about not being able to breathe, and he didn't want to get in the car. Now, sometimes people will do that just because they're resisting. But if you got the labor breathing and then they continued to complain about that, they needed to have an ambulance come to where they could have evaluated him and all. Because as it turns out, some of at least what contributed was the fact that he was not, that he had fentanyl, a high level of fentanyl, which basically tells your brain, it shuts the switch off to where you breathe. And it can shut down your whole respiratory system. I'm sorry, I can't be any more technical than that. I'm not a doctor. So they messed up early on. Now, as for the explanation of him with his knee on his neck, I can't imagine why that was needed.
Yeah.
It was an extended amount of minutes, and what I saw was, and I honestly don't see this as white or black. I see this in human beings, whether they're cops or not, whoever they are. It's what we call a case of the bygones. And that man that was on George Floyd's neck had that look on his face like, I'm in charge. I will do what I want to do. And what he did is he violated that honoring the badge and put himself above the law. And that's what makes bad cops and bad everyone. You know. But I think they messed up early on, and how it got to the thing where he was on his neck, I'll never know.
Yeah, bad news is like, it definitely travels faster than positive news, because it's definitely got to where people think that, you know, every cop is bad, or some cops may think, okay, all black people are criminals, and it's definitely got out of hand. So what type of advice would you give a person that has gone through police brutality? Because, you know, someone may go through police brutality and really been, you know, affected by it. And how are they supposed to, you know, deal with that in oncoming situations with other policemen that aren't bad cops? Or
can I answer that in sections?
Definitely.
Okay, I have an illustration, if you'll allow me.
Okay.
And if you don't like to keep it in there, you can cut it out. But I'm visual, very visual, and it helps me. And I have this illustration. Now, the first thing is, I'm going to make a point about police brutality. I'm going to capitulate, and sadly so, it happens. No doubt. There's no doubt. I will also capitulate that it happens more often probably than we know. Because you've got 700-something thousand law enforcement officers full-time, best statistics I've seen, over 200-something thousand, I think, part-time. So those are the last statistics I knew about. So there's a lot of people, almost a million. Not every department has video cameras. Not every department has a community that's willing to work together. Not every department is one that wants to do things the right way. And then you have pockets of bad people everywhere. So I'm giving you that, no doubt. But I want to show you something about statistics. In 2018, there were 10.3 million arrests, according to the best statistics available to this study. Okay, and it was done by one of the think tanks, and all by the FBI statistics. There were 10.3 million arrests that year. Okay, the amount of arrests that ended in a fatality, white, black, Hispanic, all of them, good, bad, questioned, viral, never saw the light of day because it was obvious. Every one of them, okay, out of those 10.3 million arrests, they were 0.0037 amount of the arrest made. What that is statistically, and this is where it helps me, is that if I take this dollar right here, and then I reference this penny's value to that dollar, and I took this penny and I cut it up in 1,000 pieces, under 4 of those pieces, in comparison to the value of that dollar, is how many police interactions ended in a fatality, according to those statistics. So now, I would be willing to bet that there are a few out there that didn't get on those statistics, because not everybody reports to that. I think it's in the upper 90-some-odd percentile, but I'm not positive about that. Yeah, and I'm be willing to bet some were probably salved over maybe by a community that were in leagues with one another, or somebody owed somebody a favor, because people gonna people, and I'm not denying any of that. But if you took that 4 little pieces and you multiplied it by 10 times what we know, you'd have 40 of those little 1,000 pieces of this. If you did it by 10 times more than that, you'd have 400. So you've got still less than half of this penny in comparison to this are the ones that ended up in a fatality at all. That's all of them. So the first thing is that the vast majority of police contacts don't end in that. They never go that way. And it's not even close in terms of how many interactions. If we looked on and I'm still trying to make that point, so you can stop me anytime you want to.
No, you
okay?
can keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
You look at some of the things that go viral, and they're sad events. George Floyd is one of the most obvious ones. That was obvious. There was one in one of the Carolinas, which was to me, made me sick.
Breonna Taylor?
No, it was a gentleman, named Walker. And he fled, and it was somebody filmed it behind the fence line, and he'd wrestled with an officer, got up and fled, and the officer shot him in the back several times. Okay, but if you want to take several of those names, and you put them out, and there are, if you were to tell me all the ones that you'd heard about, that regardless of how you felt about it, but they were the ones that were up in the controversial area and stuff, you might have 10, 15, maybe 20 or something like that. There had been estimated as many as over 300 million police calls a year. So each one of those is tragic, unjustifiable, and justice dictates that that's prosecuted. And I'm all for that. We're not above the law. As a matter of fact, we should be adherents of that law among everyone. That we're expected to do that. But those still, one of the first thing I would say is somebody that has suffered some abuse is the first thing I would say is it's not all, it's not even close to most. And there are a lot of us that we're just people like the rest of it. There are a lot of things we share in common. I may have a badge on, and I may have traffic stopped you, but we may like a lot of the same foods. We may like a lot of the same musics. We may be looking forward to the fact when the Razorback football team becomes good again. We're hoping that happens at some point, and we may have all kind of things in common. We may have a live-in grandmother. We may have all kind of things that we share in common. And we miss all of that if we box somebody and label them in and everything else and make assumptions that there are certain things that people do. So that's one thing. It's not all, it's not most, but it does exist, and I acknowledge that, and that needs to be dealt with. Okay. The second thing I would say is that there is a lot of times there's a divergence of understanding. You have one of the things that strikes me more and more is that people that I really like a lot, I mean a lot, and respect a lot, how if we got down to certain core issues, and I've asked you, I can't talk about the political issue and stuff, and I won't, but I might disagree wholeheartedly with the political issue and stuff and all that, and just love them to death, and just love to be around them. I have a immediate family member, one of my siblings, that I just disagree totally, and I think they hung the moon. I love them to death. I mean, they're wonderful. There's so many things in relationships that we miss if we pigeonhole someone into that box. And we say they're gonna be like that, or they're doing this, or we had a captain that had a discussion with a citizen just yesterday, and he was telling me about it, and it's an elderly person, and that's all I'll say. And they said, I feel like that you're taking someone else's side. And he went to great lengths to try to tell that person. It's not taking a side, it's what the law dictates. And an officer that's properly doing his job is that law is telling him what he can do. Sometimes one of the most difficult things for me to do when I was in patrol, and I spent most of my career in patrol, you'd go to a disturbance. And I learned a lot of things in disturbances. I learned a lot about how to respect people and how to hopefully gain cooperation. But there are many times when I'm in a man's home or a woman's home, and I know their arrest is imminent. That law book has told me I need to do this. Yeah. And the person who may be harmed if I don't, I'm responsible for their well-being, in as much as I can control that. So I don't get to just get in my car because they don't want to be arrested and drive off, because I have a responsibility with that. But what I learned a lot in that is the human aspect of it. Is many years of people teaching me things that embarrassed me, things I learned from, is one of the first things I will tell some people, especially a man, because this is the way men are, is this is your home. I respect that. I'm not here to run your home, but I got called here. Help me fix this. And even if that means he cooperates with me rather than fights me or something like that, then that's a win. And taking an extra minute when able to advise him of, I can't just walk away from this. I can't. I'm responsible here. Sometimes that helps. Sometimes it doesn't. I can talk your ear off over things I've learned. One of the most important lessons I learned, and it's something that kind of embarrassed me at the time, but I tell this all the time so everybody knows about it. I worked at Disturbance, went into a home probably about a year out of the academy, and one of the things they tell you is you always have to be in control. Well, sometimes being in control of something means you need to gain people's cooperation, because there's a lot of moving parts in homes and all. And I went into a home to where it was obvious they had extended families. They had at least 2 or 3 families that lived there. The living room was just totally filled with I think 3 different living room suites, and you could barely walk in between lanes and all. And there were all measure of people in there arguing, and I was trying to say my piece. What I learned in the academy about how to calm everything down and trying to do my best cop imitation and everything, and nobody was paying attention to me. And I'll be honest with you, it hurt my feelings. Yeah. I'm just being honest with you. They didn't pay a bit of attention to me, and I wasn't getting anywhere. And finally, I just got fed up. I remember what the academy said, and everything. I said, y'all shut up. I'm in charge here. And then all of a sudden, I felt something pat me on the leg. And I looked behind me, and there was a grandmother there. And she looked at me and smiled and said, sure you are, honey. And it was obvious that I wasn't. And one of the things that began to teach me was what you try to do a lot of times in situations like that is when they're not violent and when it's just kind of a little bit out of control and stuff, is you try to find like a matriarch or somebody that's actually the one that's looked to with the most respect, and you begin to ask them to work with you, in order, because what you want is peace, and if nobody's been hurt, nobody has to be arrested, you just want it peaceful so you don't have to be in somebody's living room, and all that. And that kind of taught me, and I have seen many a grandmama fix things, since then. And but it's working together, and all. So the first thing would be, it's not all, it's not even most, but it does happen. But don't group us all. Yeah. Just like you don't group every person of a demographic of a high crime group, because they're not the same. Definitely. The next thing would be, I've kind of lost my track because I went around a lot. But just to communicate, and that's where I was going, is that we find ourselves at an intersection and we disagree. And we label each other by you're so-and-so, or you're this, or you're a cop, and you're only doing this because of such and such and all that, without truly knowing. And we're at an intersection, and each one of us got there by a different road. Yeah. And unless you understand some of those things that got that person on that road, you're not going to really understand what their motivations are, what they're doing that for. A lot of times, in police work, I'll tell you this. There are parts of it that are exciting, parts that are interesting, parts that are rewarding, parts that are tragic, parts that are sad, all the gamut of emotions you can think about. But there are a great many parts, frankly, where I just flat wished I didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, you just don't want to, but you have to because of your job. And sometimes people think, oh, you're just doing this because you enjoy the power. No, I do it because I have to. And it doesn't hurt to be a little bit more human with people. And I think that helps and help people to understand when you get to that intersection where you disagree and everything, that's not the only thing. There are other things that are involved here, and there's a human side to what we do as well.
I think that's definitely what you just said there about how people look at it as, oh, you just want to do this because you got a badge, you have the authority, and that mindset right there has definitely traveled since all the George situation. Like, that mindset has been implemented into everyone, like, especially with it going viral on social media and things that we see on, like, every day on Facebook. For some people, it really does transform the way they thought or the way they think of whatever that situation is. And that's how they go about it in their actual lives, which may not even have to apply to their life. But since they saw it and it's social media, everyone's tied to their phones, it's definitely hard because social media is just another gateway to labeling everyone. You see a picture and you have your own story of what that picture is. Whereas your story could be way far from what that story actually is. Like, we see what we see on social media and never know the 100% backdrop of the story leading up to that video or that post or that picture. And that's the same with policemen and the whole racial issues that we have. Like, we look at each group differently because of whatever we saw on social media or whatever just had us feeling some type of way, to the point of, okay, well, since this happened, this is what I'm going to think about that person, and that's who this person is because this is what I think about that person.
That's a lot. You have a lot of insight. I was told you were wise beyond your years. You're absolutely right. I've thought a lot about that, and I don't fully know the answer to a lot of things, but I know that on social media that it presents an illusion. Mm-hmm. And the illusion is is that I can do life without encountering difficulties, without encountering people that may disagree with me, without having to explain myself, and that if everybody would just come around to my way of thinking, it'd all be great. Yeah. Because if you disagree with me, I'll unfriend you. And I'm going to just listen, we call it an echo chamber, listen to people that say the same thing I do, and then if somebody steps out of that echo chamber, they get unfriended, and my listening gets lower and lower and lower. One of the things I learned, and this will be something that you can edit out, you feel free to do that, because it may be offensive. I don't mean it to be. I mean it to be insightful because I learned. Mayor Creer has been very good. We've sat and talked a lot. And she taught me something that really made a bell go off. It really did. When we go up to that intersection, to where we are at a disagreement, more than likely that disagreement has something to do with something we find our identity in, right? What I mean is this. She told me, and I told her this, I said, Mayor, I don't find my identity in my color. I don't. You can call me a white whatever, and it would only get in line with a million other times I've been called that. And it doesn't bother me because I don't care. I don't think about it. By the same token, I don't think about your color. It doesn't matter to me. Yeah. It really doesn't. But there are things that I have, but you told me a lot of people have their identity in their skin color. And I have to say, oh, well, okay, you taught me. Because I understand when your identity is bothered, then it makes you angry. And then you want to defend that, and then you begin to draw conclusions and all, because the thing, like my identity is greatly tied to my faith, tied to my family, and third, and in that order, faith, family, and then to my profession. I'm proud of this profession. I would never say we're all perfect. I'd never say that we don't need to learn. I never would say that, but I would say we've got a pretty doggone good department, you know. But when you begin to attack those, and you haven't, but what I'm saying is, if somebody does that, then I get a little bristled.
Yeah.
You know, and so I get that, and if I have my identity in something, it gets offended. But I also can make the mistake of thinking that someone else is motivating off of the same type of identity structure, and that's not always true either.
Yeah.
You know. We have a lot of things that characterize our upbringing and all kind of different things as to what we find our identity in, and to where those tiers are and everything else. And in coming in to being a police chief, one of the things that I really wanted to do, and I'm not going to shy away from this. I put a lot of prayer in this job and a lot of prayer in this career. And all, because I realize I'm not all that in a bag of chips. I'm just a human being on God's earth, and we're trying to do our best in a lot of ways. But I really felt like that one of the most important things in my job would be, and I'm not sure the good Lord didn't tell me because he's smarter than I am. I don't think I could come up with this. Was that don't close the door on a disagreement. When I first started, don't slam the door on a disagreement. Keep relationships going with people with whom you disagree. And I think the longer that you can do that, you can begin to have an appreciation of them, at least a measure of respect. And before long, you may find something you like, you know, and those things begin to develop and all. And rather than unfriending people, you actually friend people, you know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that is a wonderful explanation of all the questions that I've asked you. I feel like as one thing that's going to help us solve issues in our community and anyone else's community, the human population, is stop putting labels on everyone. Like a person is not who they are based off of. I don't know if I could say it like that, but a person, you can't label. You just cannot go around labeling people that you definitely never had a simple conversation with, or you've never took the time out to figure out who that person is. Labeling people based off of their color, what they wear, things like that, it only leads to assumptions, and a lot of times the assumptions are incorrect, and it leads to a whole nother problem. But I definitely am thankful for you taking the time out your day to come and have this conversation.
I hope I didn't ramble too much. I could probably keep you for hours. You know.
No, it was perfect. Like, I was kind of worried if I didn't have enough questions to ask you, but it was perfect. So make sure you tune in for our next episode of Ladies First, and that will conclude the episode.